You're listening to Raised by Spirit, Bloodline by Design, written and narrated by ancestral medium Jenn LeFevre. Decree 7, Destiny Rises for Those Who Choose. Passage 7, The Crossroads of Courage. As Jenn tried to navigate the ordinary areas of her life, alongside the extraordinary unfolding around her, she felt another current rising beneath her feet. Each morning she woke before dawn, moving on instinct as she stepped into another day in the corporate cycle, the long drives, the scripted conversations, the expectations no one could ever meet. She continued, though something in her knew she couldn't keep doing this forever. By the summer of 2009, after yet another exhausting week at work, Jenn returned home and slipped into the familiar rhythm of her long-awaited weekend routine. She made dinner while Rich worked the grill, the boys playing in the background. The warmth of the evening settled around them, the scent of charred food mingling with the lingering summer air. When dinner was finished, she went inside to clean up. As she rinsed the dishes and wiped the counters, the smell of burning wood drifted in from outside, pulling her attention toward the backyard. She glanced out the window and saw that Rich had started a fire, a quiet close to their evening. Finishing up inside, she stepped out to the fire and settled beside the flames as the boys ran around a little longer before bedtime. "I'm going to get the boys to bed. Keep an eye on the fire," he said, nudging a stray log into place with his boot before walking toward the house. But she knew he wasn't concerned with the fire. He was giving her a moment to herself, as needed. The night settled around her with a quiet she had not felt in months. Time moved differently in this space. The fire breathed in slow, steady pulses, its glow pulling her deeper into the stillness. Memories from the past 4 years rose all at once, as if they had been waiting for her. Their guidance is obviously expanding, she thought. So something bigger is coming then, right? She wondered. The moment those thoughts rose, the flames answered. They surged upward in a single, focused sweep, and within their glow, a figure began to form. She held her breath as the fire parted and the figure stepped through. He was decorated in traditional Cherokee regalia, each detail catching the light as if the flames themselves honored his arrival. Although she had never seen him before, his presence resonated with a familiarity that struck her at the core. It felt as though he had been watching with patience, prepared for this exact moment to arrive. She remained motionless as the firelight danced across his ageless face, illuminating the quiet authority etched into every line. His presence moved through the moment like a living current, reaching her without a single sound. With graceful intent, he lifted his hand toward the heavens. The wind stirred in response, soft and deliberate, carrying a whisper of the ancestors, as if the natural world recognized his call. He then extended his palm toward the fire. The flames answered instantly, twisting upward in a wild, ecstatic dance, moving with the energy of transformation and revealing the sacred cycles of destruction and renewal in every flicker. Jenn felt the heat pulse against her skin, alive with meaning. Then he looked toward the earth. The grass swayed in quiet harmony with the breeze, bending without breaking, rising again with steady determination. Its movement embodied resilience, showing her the quiet magic of survival, rooted in yielding and renewal. She continued to watch, breath held, as if the earth itself were speaking directly to her. Finally, he gestured toward the trees. Each one stood as a testament to endurance and wisdom. From the fragile beginnings of a seedling to the steadfast strength of a mature willow, every tree carried the memory of seasons endured and storms weathered. His presence felt ancient, familiar, almost protective. Then he finally spoke. "The answer you seek is not new. It's already woven into the world around you, into the whispering wind, the eternal blaze of the fire, the steady embrace of the earth, and the flowing waters that carry the memory of time. You are surrounded by the teachings. You have always been surrounded. I am the chief, and I have come to help you remember," he said. Then, as if called by the fire, he began to retreat. His form softened, dissolving into the shimmering heat until he merged with the flames themselves. Overcome with wonder, she watched as the last traces of his presence dissolved into memory. His form may have vanished into the flame, but the imprint of his message remained. In the weeks that followed, his silence became its own language. It moved through her days, drawing her back to the automatic writings Maggie had given her. He guided her to her dream journals, where years of timeless wisdom from Cora and Orion had been set aside yet never lost. For decades, she had learned by watching cycles resurface, seeing how her mother's fear shaped choices like an inherited shadow. She remembered that healing was no distant mystery. It was real, and now she began to see what no longer belonged to the path she was meant to walk. By the end of 2009, Rich had already taken his own leap of faith, leaving behind construction to train as a cross-country tractor-trailer driver. He had made his choice, stepping into something new. But as he watched Jenn navigate the weight of her own silent battle, he knew she was standing at her own crossroad of choice. One evening after work, as they stood together in the quiet of their kitchen, the gravity of Jenn's path hung between them, unspoken yet undeniable. He saw it in her face before she ever said a word. "I just can't do this anymore. I want to quit. This job is like a slow death, and it's killing me. All I ever wanted was for you to be happy," he said. "And if you're not happy, then quit. It's not worth it." Despite his immediate support, she kept going. Each morning she drove to work, carrying the weight of her unmade decision. Days slipped into weeks as she moved through the motions, her body doing what her soul no longer could. Each morning she woke with a quiet knowing that whispered a truth she didn't know how to navigate. It took 6 months for something inside her to finally give way. Maybe it was yet another manager speaking to her as if her humanity were an inconvenience. Maybe it was the endless loop of empty conversations, the unrealistic expectations, the way she pretended she belonged in a system that was never meant for her. Whatever the cause, the moment rose through her, and Kevin's voice echoed clear. "You are the only one responsible for your own happiness." Without a word, without a tremor, she turned and walked into her boss's office. "Here's my badge. I quit," she said. "Wait, no. What's wrong? What can we do to fix this?" he asked. Jenn scoffed, not out of disrespect, but out of the undeniable truth he already knew. There was nothing he could do. She wasn't willing to trade her integrity for a paycheck. She knew exactly how the system worked. Promotions negotiated behind closed doors, loyalty rewarded only when it came with compliance. The expectation was simple: play the game and stay in your lane. She had watched coworkers shift under that pressure, some eagerly, others reluctantly, all eventually slipping into the same cycle. She refused to flatter egos, entertain advances, or reshape herself to climb a ladder that had been rigged from the start. "No hard feelings," she said as she handed over her badge, finally stepping out of a life that had never aligned with her truth. She might have walked away from financial stability, yes, but not without a plan. In the months of waiting, she had built a careful financial bridge, one she believed would carry her safely into the next phase. Part of that plan included cashing out her 401k, which was expected to arrive within 30 days. With that cushion, she would have enough time to stabilize, breathe, and map out her next step. But as the days stretched on, that single month quietly became 2, then 3, and still nothing arrived. Bills began to pile up, and the friendly reminders she once brushed aside hardened into stark warnings. Each morning started with the same ritual of desperate calculations: how much was left, what could wait, and what absolutely had to be paid. Each night ended in exhaustion, the uncertainty settling deeper as sleepless nights stacked one upon another. 6 months passed before the red tape finally cleared and her funds were released, but by then, the damage was irreversible. The bills had grown too high, the deadlines had slipped too far, and the home they had fought so hard to keep was lost. Jenn understood what this truly meant. This wasn't just another move. They were dismantling the home that had held their boy's childhood, the stability she and Rich had poured themselves into building. And while they all carried the weight of loss, Jenn carried something heavier: the blame. She felt it beneath the thin layer of understanding woven into every conversation, filling the silent spaces between words. Opinionated accusations gathered in the minds of friends and family, perceiving her as careless and selfish, as if she had willingly led her family into ruin. The truth was far simpler. She had left corporate life with a plan, one meant to protect her family during the transition. But instead of unfolding the way she had envisioned, the path twisted sharply, turning into a brutal detour that pushed her and her family into the unknown. On that final day, sitting in the U-Haul with everything they owned stacked around them, they felt the truth settle. They had nowhere to go. They sat shoulder to shoulder as the engine ticked in the silence, saying nothing, yet breathing the same heavy air. Outside, the world kept moving, cars passing as if nothing had changed, while the two of them remained suspended in a moment of uncertainty. In that stillness, Rich's phone rang. His father's voice broke through the silence, steady and unexpected. A family friend had an empty house, he said, a place they could land, a place they could breathe, a place to figure out what came next. But even this refuge came with limits. The house was already in foreclosure, tucked inside an overcrowded city, an hour away from where they wanted to be. It was shelter, yes, but only for a moment. Determined to preserve a sense of stability, Jenn insisted the boys remain in their familiar school district, even if it meant enduring a grueling hour-long commute each morning and evening. With Rich on the road hauling freight across the country, the responsibility of holding everything together at home fell entirely on her shoulders. Yet, in the aftermath of that turbulent transition, solitude began to take shape as sanctuary. What had felt like uncertainty slowly softened into something she could trust. Instead of resisting the quiet language of the unknown, she leaned into it, letting the path laid before her take root. In the long hours of late nights and early mornings, she continued to listen. And gradually, what had felt like displacement began to settle into a quiet sense of alignment. By 2011, after a year of relentless highway miles pulling Rich farther from everything he loved, he realized he was carrying a weight he could no longer bear. Though he had taken the leap to provide more for his family, somewhere along the way the cost had shifted. Each trip had stretched the distance inside him, not in states or hours, but in the moments he missed, the life he kept leaving behind. Eventually, he stepped off the highway, hoping the familiar rhythm of home would steady him. As he tried to find his footing again, a familiar thread from the past resurfaced, weaving itself back into the present in a way none of them had expected. After filing for divorce back in 2006, Jen's sister spent years rebuilding her life, but by 2009, she had remarried, this time to one of Rich's childhood friends. Now, 5 years later, just as the weight of change pressed in, his brother-in-law presented an opportunity that would change everything. One evening, seated across from each other at the diner, the conversation took an unexpected turn. As his brother-in-law reached for the bill, he exhaled sharply. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice gruff. "Business is picking up, and I need someone I can count on, someone who knows the work, knows how to lead." Rich leaned back, eyeing him. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" he asked. "I'm saying we go in together, partner up. My contracting company needs another set of hands. You interested?" The words landed heavier than Rich expected. "You serious about this?" he asked, his tone measured and cautious. "Dead serious. You have been busting your ass for years. Time to build something that is lasting." Later that night, as he and Jenn sat together weighing the choice he had been given, she studied him quietly. "What are you thinking?" she whispered. "Just trying to see the bigger picture," he said. "And?" she asked. "It feels possible, like something I could build, something that might finally stick." "Maybe that's your answer," she said. "Yeah, all right, fuck it. I'll call him in the morning and tell him I'm in," he said. Jenn drifted her eyes toward the window. Streetlights blurred against the glass, and in that stillness, her father's voice rose. "Hard roads don't mean wrong roads, baby. Sometimes they're the only ones that show you what you're made of," he said. She shook her head, and here we are, exactly where you're supposed to be, he finished. 3 years had passed since the day of displacement, years marked by uncertainty, sacrifice, and a quiet resilience that refused to fracture. By 2012, they were finally back in their hometown. Jenn cleaned houses, scrubbing floors, and organizing lives that weren't her own. She worked whenever she could, small, steady efforts to ease the transitions as they adjusted to the shift in Rich's career. After months of adjustment, one evening found Jenn in the kitchen cooking dinner. The space felt warm and steady as she moved between the stove and the counter, the familiar rhythm of the routine carrying her through the moment. But as she continued, a single thought pushed its way forward, steady and insistent. Did my communication reach beyond the ancestors? Questioning whether she had been something more this entire time, living with an ability she had never named, simply because she had never thought to. Am I a medium? She thought. Driven by a sudden urgency, she finished preparing dinner, wiped her hands clean, and turned toward her laptop. The glow of the screen lit her fingertips as she typed, searching for mediumship practice opportunities in her area. She didn't hesitate. She called the first number that appeared. "I'd like to sign up for your mediumship classes," she said. "All right," the woman replied. "We meet once a week. I'll text you the address and start date." Less than a week later, Jenn pulled into the instructor's driveway. The evening air was crisp, carrying a quiet stillness that made this choice feel more calculated than curious. As she entered, the living room was dimly lit, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. The air felt thick with anticipation, the unspoken thoughts of expectation and speculation rising and falling around her as they mingled with the quiet rustle of shifting bodies and hushed conversations. 15 strangers sat in a loose circle, their expressions shifting between excitement and nervous uncertainty. A few held notebooks close, while others simply held their breath, as if they were waiting for something unseen to appear. She paused at the edge of the room, letting the energy settle around her before she chose a seat, reminding herself there was no turning back now. Across from her sat an older woman whose steady, piercing gaze wasn't unkind but knowing, as if she could see something in Jenn that Jenn herself had not yet realized. "You're going to be really good at this," the woman said, her voice carrying a certainty Jenn didn't expect from a stranger. "You think so?" She laughed. The woman nodded, as if the answer were obvious. As the first exercise began, the instructor paired everyone with a partner. She was matched with the same woman and chosen to go first, a pairing that felt less like chance and more like something quietly arranged. Jenn stepped into the center of the room, her breath unsteady as she prepared to reach beyond the familiar presence of her ancestors. She felt the weight of 15 strangers watching, the thin line between fear and courage tighten inside her. Still, she stood there, letting her rhythm rise around her. Without warning, Maggie came through, holding one singular picture. Its edges were worn, its colors softened with time. At first, Jenn saw only the blur of faded ink, the faint imprint stretching across decades. Then the image formed clearly. She saw a pink and white Cadillac from the 1950s parked beneath a golden sky, gleaming as though it had just been polished. A man stood beside it with his hand resting proudly on the hood, a simple moment preserved in time, waiting for the hour it chose to return. She opened her eyes. "I don't know what to tell you," she said, "but all I'm being shown is a picture of a man standing next to a pink and white Cadillac. Does that mean anything to you?" Tears surged before she could stop them, her breath catching in sharp, uneven pulls as her hands shook around a crumpled tissue. It was as if something inside her had been struck with absolute precision. "I knew you were the real deal," she managed, her voice splintering under the weight of it. "It's my father. That's his Cadillac. He loved that damn car. He just passed last week." Her grief and recognition collided in the open atmosphere, and for a heartbeat the entire room held its breath. For Jenn, the voices softened, the night blurred, and the world fell into a quiet, reverent stillness. She had found her happiness, her joy, the quest she had searched for mercilessly without knowing its name. In that realization, she understood that she had stepped forward onto the very path they had been guiding her toward. Mediumship wasn't something she was trying. It was the ancient work she was born doing, the sacred calling that had waited patiently for her to rename it. Sleep came easy that night, pulling her grandmother's blanket close with a silent gratitude that settled through her entire being. The room around her softened, its edges dissolving as the night grew warm. But that night she drifted to a place unlike the rest, a place where urgency clung to her vision, revealing a truth no one else dared to observe. She stood and watched as the scene unfolded, as though she were looking through a window in time, existing only as a witness, silent and unseen. She saw the instructor sitting alone in a dense, suffocating room. Behind her rose a colossal shadow, far larger than anything Jenn had ever seen. It was a living entity growing from every distortion, fear, and forgotten truth that gives shadows form. It was a shadow grown evil. A fireplace flickered weakly in front of them, its faint glow fading like a dying ember resisting every attempt to rise into flame. The instructor's skin appeared gray and drained, her essence siphoned into the towering mass behind her. Her movements were unnatural, contorted, her limbs bending with the stiff obedience of a marionette forced to mimic instruction. The shadow's influence rippled through her, each movement a reminder of who held the strings. Suddenly, her father's voice cut through the oppressive scene, steady and absolute, his presence alone pushing back the darkness. "She is no longer in possession of her own will," he said. "She relinquished her vessel. It has been claimed for darkness." His words dissolved into the air, swallowed before they could fully settle, as though the shadow refused to let truth take shape. She woke abruptly with a knowing that couldn't be undone, unaware that something larger had already begun to gather around her. Weeks slipped by as she returned for what she believed was simply the opportunity to practice mediumship. During that time, other students encouraged her to join them in exploring the instructor's additional sessions on chakras, tarot, dream interpretation, and symbolism. She eventually agreed, sitting through class after class as misinformation, half-truths, and hollow teachings were offered as spiritual intelligence. The instructor recited shallow spiritual language, bait cast toward wounded seekers searching for answers, a crafted illusion cloaked in the shape of wisdom. Beneath it all, the shadowed entity fed on the already wounded, twisting their discernment and draining the last of their fading flame, a price they never knew they were paying. Most of the students absorbed every word, unaware that the vagueness, the fear-based warnings, and the carefully curated gaps in information were intentionally shaping their dependence. Just like in the dream, she saw the same parasitic shadow hiding in plain sight. As she listened and observed, the realization took root, steady and undeniable. She wasn't here to merely witness false teachings. She was here to see the shadows behind them. After only 3 months, she walked away from the classes altogether, fully aware of the lesson that unfolded during this experience and the path destiny had been shaping. But truth, too, comes with a price. Answering the call to restore absolute truth would make her more than a seeker. It would make her a threat, a rival to those who thrived in shadows, and an arch-nemesis to the grand shadow itself. But for now, she needed to talk to Rich, the one presence steady enough to anchor her while everything around her changed. Though their beliefs had always lived in separate spaces, honored without intrusion, claiming mediumship as her career was different, this would become the work her life would revolve around. She began the conversation simply. "So, I finally figured out what I want to do with my life. What will make me happy?" she said. Rich looked at her with mild curiosity. "Oh yeah? What's that?" he asked. "I want to help people in a way that goes further than traditional counseling," she said. His response was logical, practical, exactly what she expected from him. "Don't you have to go back to school for that?" he asked. Jen smiled, shaking her head. "Not necessarily. Not for the kind of counseling I want to do." She explained what she wanted to pursue, sharing the path that had been unfolding. A slow grin crept across his face, the kind that meant he was already saying yes. "All right, but if you do that, I get to buy a motorcycle." Jen exhaled through a laugh, shaking her head. She knew exactly what he was doing. She had never been thrilled about the idea of him getting another motorcycle. Not after the trouble he and Kevin used to stir up whenever they took off together. But he also knew how badly she needed and deserved this opportunity. In his own way, this was him nudging her toward the leap she had been afraid to take. "Fine," she said, and that was that. A small, ridiculous moment that carried more weight than either of them realized. A confirmation, an agreement, an unspoken promise that he was with her, always. From that day on, Jen did whatever it took to help people reclaim the truth buried beneath their shadowed wounds. She kept cleaning houses, but started offering readings on the side, slowly building her name, her reputation, her quiet return. She faced setbacks, struggles, and the weight of taking a leap of faith. Yet each experience revealed that trusting destiny requires surrender. And as she stepped beyond the crossroads of courage, she understood. Her journey wasn't about blind faith, nor was it about simply learning. It was about embodying the truth. That truth became a foundation, a movement. Return to wisdom was born from that realization, from the understanding that we are not meant to seek but to remember. Because the question is never whether destiny calls, it's whether you're willing to answer the call.